firstborn of all creation. Doesn't that sound kind of like he has a starting point? Doesn't it sound like he's part of the creation? And we might be tempted to think so, except that we need to take it in context. And so as Paul goes on, and he declares that all things have been created through him and for him, that he's before all things, in him all things hold together, he's creating a couple of different spheres, isn't he? You've got all the created stuff, and then you've got anything else. Is Jesus in the created sphere or not? Well, the answer is, all the stuff in the created space, he made it. And that means he himself isn't in the sphere of things that have been made. And so whatever we mean by firstborn, we've got to understand it in light of the claim that he's made all things. If he were part of the creation, Paul would have to say, well, he's made everything except himself. But that's not what he says. Jesus is not in the category of stuff that's been made. So for Paul, there's the category of created things, and Jesus is the agent for all of that. So what do we do with this firstborn word? Well, the church, if you struggle with that, don't feel bad. The church has been struggling with it for 1,700 years. If you go all the way back to the 4th century, they had some pretty serious arguments about what this could possibly mean. And there was one guy named Arius. There's not a test. You don't have to remember that unless you're just into the history. You can jot it down, whatever. Arius read this text and he's just reading and he's thinking, firstborn, like that sounds like he has a starting point. Like I was born, I had a starting point, and now Paul's saying that about Jesus, so that sounds like he has a starting point. So Arius sort of threw out this whole scheme. It says, you got God, and then God does his first act of creation, and he makes Jesus, and then Jesus makes all the other stuff. So Jesus is a little bit better than all the other stuff, but not quite God. That makes sense, right? So that's his proposal. And some of the other leaders of the church came around and said, so we get the desire, and we're not going to throw Arius under the bus. He was trying to do a good job. He was wrestling with the Bible, trying to understand it. He got it wrong, but he was trying. Like points for trying, right? Some of the others came along and said, but if that's the case, if he's not fully God, and he's not quite us, if he's somewhere in the middle, how can he stand in the breach? How can he take human nature into himself and take the divine nature into himself and bring them together in his physical body if he's not quite either one? So the church said, no, we can't go there. So what do we make of this word? Well, it's helpful to know that this isn't the only time that word shows up in the Bible. Firstborn is the way it's frequently translated. It's also helpful to know it's not always used for the first person born in a family. In Psalm 89, God says to David, I'm going to appoint you firstborn. Now, we all know David was not the eldest son in his father's family, right? We've read through the prophets. We know the story. Prophets got to go out, sons of Jesse, show me which one of your sons is going to be the next king. Jesse brings in all the sons, except David. He's still out in the field because everybody knows he's the little tyke and nobody wants him to be the king. And the prophet's like, none of these guys are the guy. None of them are going to work. This is not the one God has chosen. I see you got the firstborn, the second, third. You've got your eldest here. None of them are going to work. Is there anyone else? And Jesse's thinking, well, there is, but like, who lets the baby of the family be the king? We know that's not how it normally works, is it? And so the prophet says, just go get the baby and bring him in here. And David gets all the privileges of the firstborn. So when we see that word firstborn, and that's the way it's put, he's appointed firstborn, because the point isn't really chronology. The point isn't really who got born first, or when they started, or in what order they came into being. The point is, what status does the firstborn have? And so you could translate it, and I think this would be a faithful translation, that Jesus has the preeminence of the firstborn over all creation. See how that frames it a little bit differently in a way that emphasizes the status and the priority, his prominence. It's not making a claim about his chronology, no more than Psalm 89 is making a claim about David's birth order. It's making a claim about his preeminence. And in the ancient world, if you were born first, in most cases, you got all the stuff. You got the power, you got the money, you got the inheritance, you got you were preeminent in your family, in your kinship group. So when Paul says Jesus is the firstborn over all creation, it's not, well, he was made first and everything else was made after that. It's that he has the status of the firstborn. He's the ruler. He's in charge. Everything has been given to him. He's behind it. He's the agent. He's the one who accomplishes all of this. He reigns over all things. He has the preeminence of a firstborn son in relation to the world that he's made, which is the role God has in relation to the world he has made.